Hey everybody, this is Dream. Thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing in the previous videos. If you do like these videos, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And also, if you have any players you feel like I missed out that you want to put in the comments below, feel free to do that. And just comment in any general reason that you would want on the video. At any rate, let me get into today's matchups. The games today start at 7:05, and there are 6 games. The late game being the New York Yankees versus Oakland. And then we have the White Sox versus Baltimore, Cincinnati versus Philadelphia, Toronto versus Boston, Colorado versus New York Mets, and Minnesota versus Houston. Some pretty solid matchups here, some scoring ability, as well as some really good pitchers. So I've gotten all the games broken down here, and I've got some pretty good players, and I've got some stacks for you. My stackable teams are going to be Philadelphia, the New York Mets, Toronto, and then the Chicago White Sox. The Yankees and Houston Astros both have decent situations, but maybe a couple players that you could kind of fit in with players from those other teams, depending on who you like there. And so I'm just going to go through the my top pitchers and then the people who are the worst pitchers, kind of, and go from there. So my top 3 pitchers, I have 3 today. One is an overall top tier, which is Jacob DeGrom. I mean, isn't that obvious that he's going to be the guy? Uh, the Rockies are not really good when they're at home, and so when they're not at home, which they're at the New York Mets today, so that's definitely going to be a boost for him. DeGrom is also really good at home. I think his splits are actually quite a bit higher at the Mets stadium than it is on the road, and so that's something to definitely like. So he's my overall top tier player, and he hasn't really had too many. He hasn't had a bad game in his 4 games so far, really. His first game was a little bit shaky, but he was a little bit more limited on his pitches. And as he's ramped up, he's been really solid. And 3 of his last 3 games have been against good teams, Atlanta and Philadelphia. So he's doing pretty well. In a weak team like Colorado is going to have a tough time with him. So he's definitely my overall top pick. My second top tier pitcher is Aaron Nola for Philadelphia against Cincinnati. Cincinnati has been playing a little bit better, but they still don't have a ton of power or anything, and he's just a really good pitcher. He's not overall the top option just because obviously it's Jacob DeGrom, but he's a little bit hit and miss at times, but he's decent enough where he gets a lot of strikeouts and stuff. So even if he doesn't have his best game, you can still count on him scoring a decent amount because he'll likely get some strikeouts. And you can see that reflected in a lot of his previous games. He'll have a game where he gives up a few runs or even gets the loss, but he still gets 8 or 5 strikeouts. So it's just he's a little bit hit or miss sometimes, but he's got a good matchup and he gets strikeouts, and he's gonna have a really good shot of a win, especially with Philadelphia being in a good hitting position. So he's definitely my second best option. Then I have one more guy that I think is a top tier option, which is Kevin Gossman. Now, Boston does have a couple guys that can hit the ball pretty well, but he has been really good and against Boston himself. In the 4 games versus Boston this season, he's not been under 25, and he's averaging 30.5 fantasy points. And that's pretty crazy stat to go up against a team 4 times and have four straight 25 plus point games. So he has to be in the running as a top tier option. He's a little less expensive than the top 2 guys, so if you need a little bit of salary relief, he can give you that. However, he's not going to give you a ton, and DeGrom is definitely worth the money today. There are 3 guys that are kind of in the middle that I consider 2 of them to be a secondary tier. I don't really like them that much because they're kind of risky based on matchups and what lefties and righty splits and stuff like that. But both of them are guys that you could kind of throw in there if you really need salary relief. One of them is Luis Garcia. He is going up against Minnesota, who is a pretty good team. He doesn't have the greatest ERA and stuff like that, but he does, sometimes gets at least 5 strikeouts, which he's been doing. But as you can see, some of his scores leave a little bit to be desired. And, he's 10-8 on the season, so He's not obviously the most ideal, and he's been giving up a lot of earned runs as of late. So he's a little bit risky, but I'm just, trying to search for a guy that is going to be decent for a little bit cheaper price. Be honest, he's probably not cheap enough for the production he'll probably give you, and so I'd probably hold off on him. But he's just an option if you need to save a little bit of money. You got to be careful too with the lefties for Minnesota. So, as for the other pick is Lance Lynn for the Chicago White Sox. He is going up against Baltimore, and he is a kind of hit or miss pitcher as well. He's been kind of doing good as of late though, and even though that the Baltimore is doing pretty good, he's a cheaper option than Luis Garcia and probably a little bit safer at his price point, and he's got some upside with the strikeouts as well, a little bit more so than Luis Garcia does. But again, Baltimore has a couple guys like Adley Rutschman and others that can really hit the ball well, and so you do have to be careful with that team. And then I have a Hail Mary pitcher. I definitely think, unless you're just really trying to save a lot of money, you're not going to want to use this guy. But he has the potential to get some good games. But obviously he's not a great pitcher, but he's got a really good matchup, and that is going to be Jameson Taillon for the New York Yankees. He does get a lot of wins because it's the Yankees, so that gives him a potential 4-point bonus. And he's going up against Oakland, who's extremely bad. They only have a couple players that are even super risky. But he's not the best pitcher. He had 15 points against Oakland one time. So he is a guy that you could throw in if you just need a Hail Mary at pitcher. He's definitely going to be that if that's what you want to do. But he does have some potential, so it's not like he's without any potential. And then as for the pitchers that we really want to go up against, one is Justin Dunn for Cincinnati against Philadelphia. So Philadelphia hitters, the guys that we're going to be looking at. Other pitchers, Cutter Crawford for Boston against Toronto, and Ryan Feltner, Colorado's pitcher against the Mets. Both those guys look like they're in really prime position to give up some hits and home runs, in fact. Especially Feltner for the Colorado. Seems like he's just not very good. And then also Jordan Lyles and Chris Archer. Lyles being Baltimore's pitcher and Archer being Minnesota's pitcher, both have the Houston Astros and the White Sox, which definitely look stackable in those games as well. And then James Kaprikan, I don't know how to say his last name, for Oakland against the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees have been kind of rough, but they've got a couple guys that could really hit the ball against a pitcher like him, and so those are the pitchers that I kind of want to target the most. Obviously can't target all of them, but Dunn, Feltner, and Crawford are probably my top 3 when it comes to who I want to target. Philly, New York Mets, and Toronto. So let me go ahead and get into the batters themselves. Let's go ahead and start with the catchers. So my top tier pick is JT Realmuto again. He's just got all the upside in a really good matchup, and he's been stacking and smacking the ball around, and he's a really good option. Obviously, he's pretty expensive, but it's hard to go wrong with him. Adley Rutschman is another guy who's been hitting the ball pretty well as of late. His price is pretty high, though, but he is an alternative to JT Realmuto if you want to, go an alternate route. He does have a little bit of a matchup boost, and he's been hitting the ball well, but obviously he's for Baltimore, so you do have to keep that in mind. Then I have 2 secondary picks. One of them is Sean Murphy. So if you don't want to use Taillon, which, he's going to be hit or miss, here's the one guy that can probably smash the ball against him. Murphy does seem to do well when he plays, but he hasn't been playing every game because Shea Lingerlees has been doing well, who's I'll mention here in a minute. And then Alejandro Kirk for the Toronto Blue Jays. He's always kind of a home run threat. He's been a little bit hit or miss as of late, but he's a good secondary option. He's a little bit lower on the last 10 than I'd like, but he is a 300 hitter, and so you can count on him getting a couple hits most of the time. and at least getting you some points on the board. Though he's not all that much less expensive than some of the other guys, it was hard to find a lot of value at catcher with the particular games that we have going. But if you do need a value play and you just really want to throw caution to the wind, then Langerles is here for you. He's a home run or bust kind of player. He is going to strike out a couple times. You just have to deal with that. But if he hits that home run or hits a triple or something, then it'll pay off for you, obviously. And he doesn't have the worst matchup, obviously, but he doesn't have the best one either. So he's kind of a home run dart throw. If you think he can get a triple or a home run, then you can lag him up. But if you don't, then you probably just want to keep him on the bench and pay up for somebody. So that's pretty much what I have at first base. At catcher. At first base is probably the most valuable, other than outfield today. There's plenty of options available, and so you can kind of use these guys to play down. I probably wouldn't pay for any expensive player at first base, just since there's so many good, decent plays at first. So my top pick is Jose Abreu for the White Sox against Baltimore. He's been hitting the ball really well, and as the White Sox seem to have started to figure something out, he is definitely one of the guys that has been pretty consistent and is hitting the ball well at this point of the season. So I definitely like him. He's been 7.9 for the last 10. The next two are my secondary picks. Pretty much the guys that you could replace Abreu with if you like them better. Luis Reyes from Minnesota is one of them. Obviously, he's got a good batting average. He's not really a home run hitter, but you can expect that he's going to get some hits most games. And then Trey Mancini for Houston if he plays. He's a really solid option. Obviously, there's, when the stars align, he's a home run threat. And I always like playing him because it's a lot of fun to have in the lineup, especially when he does hit a home run. But he does strike out a little more than you'd like sometimes. But he's been doing pretty well in Houston despite the strikeouts and the low batting average. He's still averaging 7 points last 10 games. And so I'm pretty confident in him when he is, in the lineup and against a favorable pitcher. So we'll see if he is in the lineup. He's somebody that you're gonna want to take a look at. A third option that's kind of a secondary alternative is Ryan Mountcastle. He doesn't really have a bat boost today, but he's a solid option at a cheap price that you could utilize. He's been hitting the ball pretty well. He's been getting some home runs as of late, and so I typically like him in particular matchups. And while he does have a probably not the most ideal matchup for pitcher, I mean, Lance Lynn does occasionally give up a lot of home runs, and so he would be somebody who would potentially hit one. And then another secondary alternative is Daniel Vogelbach for the Mets. He's been hitting the ball kind of lackluster, but he is hitting home runs, and when he does get hits going, he can really score some points. And so he's a guy that I sometimes look at if I need a cheaper alternative at first base. Granted, he's not much cheaper than any of the other guys I mentioned. That's why he's pretty low on the alternative list. And if you just have money to burn because you're like throwing caution to the wind with the pitchers, you can throw Vladimir Guerrero in your lineup. He's got a nice matchup today. He's been 8.9 over the last 10 games, and he's got a nice stack ability for the lineup. He is expensive, so you're gonna have to deal with that with other players. But he's a guy that you can go to. If you really need to pay down at this particular position, which I kind of don't recommend, but you've got two options here. One of them being Seth Brown, who could actually also play outfield. He can hit home runs. He's just not been very good really all season, but he does have some upside in the matchup, just being pretty much one of the only Oakland players that can hit the ball, and Talion being kind of hit and miss at times. He's one of the few guys that's actually had some semblance of ability. Again, he's a Hail Mary pick because he can score, 20 to 30 points occasionally, but most of the rest of the time he's not going to score much. The other one is going to be Gurriel for Houston. I also kind of consider him to be a Hail Mary pick just because while he's been hitting the ball, average, he has potential for some big games, but he's not really a home run threat. But he can get you some hits and score you some points. So those are kind of my Hail Mary picks. But I definitely don't really recommend them. But, there are some guys that you could target if you really needed to. And so let me go ahead and get to second base. It was kind of hard to find a lot of good players at second base. Usually second base and shortstop are the hardest. So, but I did find a few cheaper guys, actually. But my top overall pick is going to be Jose Altuve. Just for he's been hitting the ball well, and he just hit a home run yesterday. We like that, obviously. 2 home runs the last 10 games. He is back from a previous injury, so I think he's probably hitting the ball pretty well as of late, and so he's a pretty good option. He's a pretty safe option, too, in the matchup that he's in against Archer. Then for a top-tier alternative, if he does play, Jeff McNeil has a really good position. He doesn't necessarily hit home runs at a high rate, but he does get a lot of hits. He's batting .439 in the last 10 games with 8.6 fantasy points a game. As you can see, he's only had a couple kind of dud games in the last 10. So he's a really decent option for a pretty decent price. He's actually had a really tough schedule, so it's kind of too during that stretch. So, with Atlanta at games, which he actually hit well against Atlanta, and a lot of games against Philadelphia. So, having an easier opponent like Colorado with a plus pitcher, where he's really in the plus seat when it comes to the bat, then I definitely like him today. I have 2 secondary players that are $4,000 each. One is Gene Segura. I think I'm saying his name wrong, but whatever. He's averaging 7.8 points per game. He's not a big home run threat either, but he's, pretty solid hitter. So he's somebody that I like as a secondary option. Not really a stack bonus with him, just based on his batting side, but overall he's still a decent player. And then Luis Arraez, where is he? For Minnesota. He's got a pretty good, matchup if you don't use Garcia. He hits the ball really well. I believe he's on pace to be the AL batting title. So, and then he's been batting, he's been a little bit lower the last 10 games. He still is a solid player. And so I feel like he'll probably get out of the little bit of a mini slump that he is in sometime soon. And he's been doing pretty decent against Houston. Excuse me. And so he's a good alternative if you don't really like McNeil or Segura. But he does have a stack plus though as well for Minnesota, which I don't think I had Minnesota on my list, but he has a batter plus, based on his batting side and the pitcher and stuff like that. And then if you need a Hail Mary at second base, you're gonna look at Mr. Nick Maton for Philadelphia. He just has the batter plus for the matchup, and Philly, you could throw him in there. He has potential for some big games, though he's been kind of hit or miss lately. But, he's a guy that you could potentially throw in and steal a home run with. Not real likely, but again, you're just looking for a Hail Mary. He's one of the guys you could look for. So that's pretty much what I have at second base. Pretty good. I think there's several good options available, and so I feel like you're going to be okay at that position. Third base might be the hardest position when it comes to picking who you like the most, even though there's not very many options that are top tier. So my top overall pick is Alec Bohm for Philadelphia. You're just going to want to plug him in because of the Philly stack. And he looks like a pretty solid player. His price has come up a little bit as the last few weeks, but he's also hitting the ball pretty decently. And he's pretty safe. I mean, he's not a huge home run threat, but he's been hitting the ball really well. 294 the last 10. Sorry, that's away. He's been batting 326 in the last 10 games for 9.4 fantasy points. I really like him. I mean, there's just not a ton of third base for this particular slate, so finding a guy like him who's pretty decent and pretty fairly priced is not a bad thing. He's really been coming on as of late. Obviously, the other pick that I that I consider a secondary pick just because his price is up is Alex Bregman. He does have the, plus percentage, but he's been kind of like boomer bust during this, stretch. And so you do have to be a little bit careful with him. You don't want to pay up for him, even though he's averaging 14.3 points per game. Some of his games have been pretty high scoring with a 55, a 24, and a 14. So you do kind of have to be a little bit careful because he's not the biggest home run hitter. I mean, he has 19 home runs, but you do have to be a little bit careful with him and get him in the right places. Obviously, it's not a bad matchup for him, but I don't know if he's going to be the guy that I really want to pay up for with the dud risk that comes with it for that price. And then I just have a Hail Mary pick because I just couldn't find a lot that I really liked at this position, and that's Yo Makota. Just because I don't even know how to say his name really, but sorry about that. But he doesn't hit the ball very much, but he has been has some ability. Occasionally he'll sneak in a home run, and so I'm kind of just saying he's kind of a home run boomer bust, like a maximum boom, maximum bust potential, where if he can get going, he would be a decent option. He just hasn't been really good. And another option too is Ramon Urias. He's kind of in the same boat. He hadn't been hitting the ball well, but he has some boomer bust potential, and so he's somebody that I also kind of like as a Hail Mary option. And then we're gonna go ahead and get into the shortstop position, which I think that you have kind of three options here that are going to give you some cheap or expensive choice. Just depends on what you want. My first option is Jorge Mateo for Baltimore. He's been hitting the ball well of late, and you can see that he's gotten a bunch of 10s in the thing, as well as some 7s and stuff, and I really like that. He's been 7.6 last 10 games, and I feel like the Orioles have been hitting the ball pretty decently as of late and scoring the ball, and he's one of the guys that's been taking advantage of that. Obviously, he's not like the best shortstop ever, but shortstop is usually a pretty hard position to get people from, and so it's, to have somebody that's actually pretty decent, that's good enough. Francisco Lindor is the other option, top tier option. He hits the ball really well for the Mets. He has been kind of hit or miss, but he's still a solid player, and so you can still, count on him in good situations, and he's in a good situation today. And then the final piece option is Jeremy Pena. He's been hitting the ball well all season long, but he's been in a little mini slump for a couple games before, and then he got some good games, and then he's kind of been slumped again. But we'll see. Maybe he can be a guy. I think he's like the third best of those ones. But if you don't like Mateo, but you want to pay the same price for Pena, you wouldn't feel too unhappy about it. But it's a little bit more risky than Mateo is probably. And so finally, let's get to the outfielders. We have a nice arrangement of outfielders. And so we have a few top tiers, a few alternates, and a bunch of secondary options, and then some expensive ones, and then two Hail Marys, which you've already heard, Seth Brown and Nick Maton. So I won't mention those guys again, but you can definitely use both of them at outfield if you need to with their cheap prices. But my two top tier options are Benintendi for the New York Yankees. He's been hitting the ball really well. He's not really, home run threat most of the time, but he can get points on the board, and that's what we like at outfield positions. And then another one is Kyle Tucker, who has probably been one of the better players available. And even though his price has come up, he is batting .357. He really hadn't had too many bad games as of late. And I like guys that haven't had really many bad games as of late. So if you can afford to pay for him, then he's definitely a good one. The next guy that I like is Castellanos for Philadelphia Phillies, part of the Phillies stack. He's been hitting the ball pretty well. Of course, you do hope he hits a home run when you use him, but he's playing well, and he is a good alternative if you need him. Another option is Cedric Mullins, obviously an expensive player, But, he always has good threat of home run when he's got the right opponent and stuff like that. And he does have a good opponent today. So he's a good option. And then for some secondary options, obviously, Jordan Alvarez coming off of that a little bit of a health scare he had a few weeks ago. He is hitting the ball okay, so hopefully he can get back to the swing of things. And then also Andrew Vaughn for the Chicago White Sox. He has a plus matchup today, and he's probably one of the better players on the White Sox to get a chance to get some hits. He's probably due a little bit of a home run as well, so it's been a little bit since he's had one. But he's a pretty decent option and a plus matchup. And he's pretty cheap. He's at $3,800, so he's a guy that you could kind of throw in there if you need the money saved. And then some secondary alternatives. I have Mark Canha, who has a pretty good matchup situation, and he's been batting the ball really well with 10.3 per last 10 games. And Alex Verdugo, who I also have liked quite a bit off and on this year. He just hits the ball pretty well, and even though the Red Sox have been kind of piddling around off and on, he's been doing pretty good. And so he's a guy that I feel like has some upside just based on the fact that he's been batting pretty well. 341 for the last 10. And then another option that we have that's more expensive, I have 3 of those. Let me just short this way. And I'm just going to mention these guys. We have George Springer. He's been absolutely mashing the ball, but he's extremely expensive. Same with Starling Marte for the Mets. These guys could all be, these two both could be stack potential, but this guy also has potential to just, boom or bust. And then Aaron Judge, I mean, do I need to really explain why Aaron Judge is a potentially good option? Obviously, his price is super high, but, he's been hitting lots of home runs this season. He's at 48 already, and he's chasing, so... that's pretty much what I have for the outfield position. Obviously, there's not a ton of value today. You're going to have to dig around to try to get some really good value options, but there are a few. So you're going to have to really work to balance the lineup so that you can afford the pitchers you want. You might have to take a flyer on one of the, Talion or Lynn or Garcia in order to fit some better bats in. But overall, it seems like it's going to be a mid-level slate, probably not the highest scoring slate we've ever seen. But I will say, we got some unusual teams like the White Sox and anyway, we have a couple really good stacks and stuff like that available, with Philly, the Mets, and Toronto, and an unusual stack with the White Sox, potentially. So, yeah, if you like any of those guys, feel free to utilize them and see what kind of lineups you can build around the players that you like, and feel free to mention if there's anybody that I didn't mention, below. And thanks for liking, commenting, and subscribing, and have a nice day, guys.